Well, happy spring and welcome to the first Prices at the Pumps on SaltWire as part of Spring 2024. I'm Scott Squires. Pleased to be joined, as always, by the energy expert, Dan McTagg. And Dan, happy spring to you. Let's talk about what consumers are going to be expecting at the pumps coming up in the next couple of days. Let's do Newfoundland first, and then Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. What do you got?
Well, never good news. You and I have been warning this is going to happen, and it's about to unfold. If you're in Newfoundland, you want to get to the gas station today. You don't want to wait till tomorrow, both for gasoline and diesel. I'm looking at a 7.5 cent a liter increase for gasoline tomorrow. So 171 will be more like $1.78, and a 4.2 cent increase for diesel. Now, I have this up on gaswizard.ca under St. John's, but nevertheless, that's what is indicated. The rest of the country has had to bear a pretty significant increase. I'm in Toronto, Milton, Ontario, actually, just outside for those who know it. We've seen in the past week and a half a net increase at the pumps of 12 cents a liter. So don't think you're alone. Unfortunately, that's the way it works, but at least you've got here through SaltWire a heads up, and on a 50, 60 liter fill up, that's likely to save you about $10. So take advantage of it while you can. Don't wait till midnight when the price surges.
Are we looking at the same thing in the rest of the region?
Yeah, I was just going to get to that. Nova Scotia has a slightly different formula, as does PEI, which uses rack prices. That's the wholesale rack price. They're both looking at a 6 cent increase, perhaps more, perhaps less. Very difficult to say where they're going to land, but the 4 cent increase that we're seeing in Newfoundland will be identical in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and PEI for Friday, and 6 to 7.5 cents a liter would be where I'm looking at for New Brunswick, at least 6.5 for PEI and Nova Scotia. All in all, don't wait till Friday if you happen to be in any of those three provinces, because it's going to sting. I don't see this slowing down. The work that we've been doing all week has been to demonstrate that overall prices in Canada for gasoline going into summer is going to be up 25 cents a liter. I'm, of course, including this week's increases. So at least another 20 cents a liter with everything that we're seeing.
Dan, that's a pretty significant jump for week over week. And of course, the big carbon tax hike coming on April 1st. We'll get to that in a minute. But why this kind of big jump this week, from what you can see?
Yeah, well, oil jumped, $6 a barrel in the past week. It was trading for WTI in the 77, 78 range this time last week, now at $82, $83 a barrel. Same for Brent, having moved from the low 80s, 81, all the way up to 86, pushing 87. Now it's come down a little bit today, but this is just a blip. I'm waiting, of course, and I think we should all focus on something no media in Canada has talked about to this point. What happens if this afternoon, that is this Wednesday afternoon, the U.S. Fed, the Federal Reserve, decides to cut interest rates? If that happens, and there's a 50-50 chance it's going to happen, look for energy prices to soar, because that means, in theory, less cost for credit, more money in people's pockets, and the fight on inflation will have lessened a little bit. And that means very good economic news. So I would say that, across the country, and, for what it's worth, not only the switch over from winter to summer gasoline, which usually brings about a 7 cent increase. We know, of course, the carbon tax at 3.8 cents a liter on April 1st. But we have to look at oil, not only up this week by, $6 a barrel, likely to go up another $6 to $8 a barrel between now and the May 24 weekend. And there I might be very conservative. We'll have to wait and see.
Dan, we referenced the carbon tax. April 1st, a significant hike is planned. And we've been talking about the pushback that's been coming provincially, certainly the last several weeks, with 7 premiers basically asking for either a cancellation or a pause. Some polling saying that 70% of Canadians don't want this hike on April 1st. And a pretty significant announcement yesterday coming from the Nova Scotia Progressive Conservative Party, saying all parties in Nova Scotia's legislature have voted unanimously in support of a PC motion calling on Nova Scotia MPs to scrap the carbon tax hike. That's significant. basically all parties, who sometimes it's hard for all parties to agree on anything, they've all come together in Nova Scotia and they've said, yeah, we sign on, we agree. This needs to be canceled. What's going on, and what's your sense of what moves the federal government may make between now and April 1st?
Well, the Trudeau government's going to dig its heels in, as it does with everything else. It's completely blind to and oblivious to, the idea that somehow this is causing and inflicting pain. Let's understand that most people do not buy the nonsense about rebates being bigger than what you're paying. In some instances, that may be true, but it doesn't cut the mustard here in Nova Scotia or in New Brunswick or in Newfoundland or in British Columbia or in PEI, provinces with a second carbon tax, where we're already paying 6 to 8 cents a liter, and there is no rebate. We also know that these prices cascade throughout the economy and drive up the cost of everything else, which isn't rebated, nor is the HST that you pay on that carbon tax rebated. And let's put it in perspective. Today, it's 14.31 cents a liter, but you have to add that HST that pushes it to 16.2. In the case of where we're going to go April 1st, it goes from 14.31 to 17.61, so a 3.3 cent increase. However, you have to add half a cent because of HST. It means, Scott, that we're looking very clearly at a 20.2 cent levy that has been imposed on the price of fuel. If you think about fuel at $1.60, $1.70, $1.80 a liter, 20 cents a liter represents 9 or 10%. What that really means is that this is 4 times the level of inflation. And make no mistake, gasoline and diesel prices drive inflation. When StatsCan comes out and says, inflation is up or down, it's almost always predicated on the price of gasoline. Fool around with that. You're not just driving up the cost of living. You're actually doing the job that the Bank of Canada doesn't want to do, and that's to rein in inflation. It's a highly inflationary, very corrosive, and politically, it is suicide for my old party, the Liberal Party, to continue down this road of ignoring the pleas of maritime Canadians and Canadians in general. By the way, twice the Maritimes have come together. Their Atlantic provinces have come together and said, in regardless of partisanship, we want to end something. They got the exemption for the first clean fuel standard. They got the exemption for the second one applying to home heating fuel. I think the federal Liberals and their friends in the NDP would be loath to ignore the entreaties of the 4 Atlantic provinces, who, in my view, together, combined, speak more eloquently to the needs of people like myself in Ontario. Hopefully they'll be successful, but unfortunately, I think we're dealing with a very different set of leadership in this country that has obviously bent a very deaf ear to the plight of Canadians, and I think that's going to, in 20 months, mean a complete wipeout the Atlantic Wall for the Liberal Party if they continue and do not take this warning seriously.
Dan, we're going to talk pipelines in a second, but just first, real quick, something we've talked about on and off with prices here is, will we see $2 a liter? And I know here in this region, we got close. We never got there. In your opinion, how likely are we that in the Atlantic region over the next few months that and into the summer, we see $2 a liter?
Well, you'll be $1.77 tomorrow in Newfoundland and higher. So $2 is definitely within striking range. The 7 cent increase in wholesale prices as a result of switchover winter-summer gasoline, as I mentioned earlier, the carbon tax, yet another second carbon tax, that's 4 cents plus 4 cents plus 7 cents. So my calculation is 15. It wouldn't take oil much more to go to $90 a barrel. It's another 10 cents. That's 25. Yeah, $2 a liter is definitely doable and within range, especially as we head towards the dog days of summer where demand is very high. And we could get one of those hurricanes in the U.S., which should push it even higher. Could we see a day where it's $2.10 in Newfoundland? Yes. Could we see $2 in Nova Scotia? Yeah. Maybe a little bit less in PEI and New Brunswick, but not much less. I think the country is looking at a net increase, realistically, of about 25 cents a liter between now and say just around or after the July 1st Canada Day holiday.
Well, we'll continue to talk about that week over week. And Dan, I referenced pipelines earlier, and it's always great to chat with you to get some of the information that's out there, but maybe dig in a little more and talk about the details. What can you tell us about what's been in the news lately regarding pipelines in Canada?
Well, I thought very good news, and it just happened earlier today that an announcement was made that they're beginning to fill the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. That's the 965,000 barrel pipeline that is twinned with the existing Trans Mountain pipeline that runs from Edmonton all the way to Vancouver. There's a second pipeline, very controversial. The BC government fought it. The federal government gave permission to it. The company that owned it, Kinder Morgan, kept getting attacked by the Greens and by activists and NGOs, and it basically said, if the federal government doesn't want to stand up for its own regulatory process, then we're going to sue them for billions of dollars. That's where your government, my government, bought the pipeline, and the price went from $0 to $32 billion. That's the bad news. The good news is that for the first time ever, it appears that the first customer to buy 500,000 barrels of oil will be a Chinese oil company. And that oil company will be taking that barrel of oil, likely in May or June, and sending it to China. That's significant because for the first time, perhaps on a large scale, we've ever seen Canadian oil make it to markets other than the United States. It means the big discount that our producers were being embarrassingly forced to pay or get $50 when oil is selling at $80, or a $30 discount a barrel, will finally end. What that means, strengthening Canadian dollar, and the first opportunity to say to our American friends, if you don't want our oil, the rest of the world does. So price it properly or find your own oil somewhere else. And good luck with that because you don't have enough heavy oil. So it's a good day for Canadians. It'll be great for revenues for government, but it'll also help something that might help us in that 25-cent a liter increase that we're going to see. That's the strengthening of the Canadian dollar. It takes 135 pennies to buy a US dollar. That adds 25 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. If markets take this very seriously and we continue to sell oil at a much higher price, at 500,000 plus barrels a day, it seems to me that we might actually see the Canadian dollar pick up maybe 20 or 30% of its value versus the US greenback. What does that mean? More money in your pockets. We could see a Canadian dollar now trading at about 120 pennies versus the US dollar. That will make all of us richer in ways that we couldn't possibly imagine. But Scott, really important people understand every commodity that we use in this country is priced in US dollars. So when you're on parity, on par, you have the petrodollar and everything's fine. Yeah, you get higher prices, but the Canadian dollar serves as a bit of a shield. We lost that shield. And we lost it because of green policies that have done everything to ensure that Canada's #1 resource export was blocked in. No longer. We see a little bit of reprieve here. And that's going to put more money in your jeans in ways that you perhaps even more than any government could do. Bring the Canadian dollar back into parity with the US greenback. And a lot of us will have greater purchasing power, substantially so. If we had two pipelines, we'd have the world in our hands.
Well, with the price at the pump going up this week, it's good to have some positive economic news on that front for Canadian consumers. Dan, we always appreciate your insights. And that's something we're definitely going to follow in the weeks to come and to see what else that may lead to in terms of the opening up of Canadian commodities being sold like that. Dan, we always appreciate having you here in Prices at the Pumps on SaltWire. But when you're not with us, I know you got other stuff to do. I know you do other things. Where else can folks find you, connect with you, interact with you?
Well, look, you can always email me, president@affordableenergy.ca. That's where a lot of the policy work is done. And of course, the gas price prediction is gaswizard.ca. We also, and from time to time, I will use the gas price wizard on Twitter. Sometimes I wind up with some interesting people. I don't normally engage at length with them, but I'll give you a respectful response to a respectful question. If not, then there's a little destination for everybody. It's a little green garbage can. I love using it.
Yeah, I've seen a few folks end up in that situation on your X account. I'm glad that I'm still not one of those, Dan, and I'll try to always stay out of that bin for sure.
Well, back to climate training for those who do like that, and it's always a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun on Twitter. You can let your hair down, and I do so with absolute respect, but with the kind of thing where, hey, let's have at her. But if we can't have a good discourse, maybe you want to take it up with someone else, especially if you're a troll.
Dan, always a pleasure. And when we chat again next week, we'll be that much closer to April 1st. And who knows what developments we'll see between now and then. But always lots to chat about with you. Thanks for your time. We'll do it again next week.
Great to be here again, Scott. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Dan.
Bye now.